Hello and welcome again to Let's Talk About It. We're here to talk about and destigmatize childhood sexual crimes. Many people don't want to talk about it. We do. I'm so happy tonight to have with me Kalli. Kalli comes from an undisclosed location, but she's going to share a very personal story with us. We're going to start with asking Kalli what her motivation is for being here with us tonight. And with that, Kalli, I'm going to go ahead and let you start.
Okay. I, I think it's incredibly important to talk about these things and be open about experiences that, maybe others are struggling with, that I've been through and that I could maybe help with my words. The biggest thing for me is that I feel lucky to have been able to pass to the other side of my situation. Um, in a sense, I won. I have a conviction against my abuser, and I want to share my experience going through of all of that and coming out on the other side happier and feeling more free, and try and motivate girls out there that and women that need, some help getting that push just to say something.
That's awesome. That is every time I start this, the stories are always different, and that's just absolutely beautiful. And it's such an important message that actually you can indeed win. A lot of people don't get justice, but a lot of people do. And I love that. So with that, that's a perfect segue for you just to move in. I want you to take your time. I want you to share the story in the way that you want to share it, with the depth that you want to share it, and we'll explore it a little bit more. But if you could just take us back and set us up what happened in your life and tell it in your own words.
Okay. I'm gonna do my best.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah, I've told this story quite a few times now that I have kind of worked through this. So I moved in with my dad after not living with him for my younger years. I lived with my mom, and as when I moved in, I was in high school, and our neighbors had 3 kids, and it was a husband and wife. And pretty quickly, they asked me if I'd like to babysit and, spend some time with the kids so that they could go out on date night. And I was over the moon because, at 14, what 14-year-old doesn't want to get paid to hang out with kids almost their own age? So I started babysitting, and it wasn't too long after that the relationship between the father and I got a little, it was inappropriate. And it was about, I could feel that it was starting to get inappropriate. And then one evening, I actually fell asleep on their couch after putting the kids to bed, and they came back late. And that was the first time that he abused me, was on the couch. And I had woken up, but pretended not to be awake. And he did very inappropriate things to me while I was sleeping. And that's kind of where it started. I kind of pushed it out of my mind. And then, say a couple weeks later, it just slowly started to get more and more and more. And, I think from the very beginning, I was groomed into believing that anything he does is, good and, appropriate. He, he made me feel like I was special. And he did that in such a way that, as a young girl, I had never had anybody talk to me like that before. And getting that attention was something very different. And I think, I think he fed off of that, really.
And when you say,
And
can I just ask, I want to stop just because I think my story is so different than yours. You know, was this, did he come to you in ways that made you feel like an attractive woman? I mean, what were his grooming techniques? Just, this isn't just for the world at large, but for those that can't get into counseling, can't afford it, that type of thing, people that are just teetering on the edge. I think it's so important for us to talk about what grooming looks like. I've actually never really discussed that with anybody from that. I think that's if you're comfortable with that, what were the messages that he was giving you?
so as he owned an automotive shop, so I was always kind of a gearhead when I was younger. I really loved like classic cars and things like that, and he had access to all of these, you know, expensive vehicles, and that was kind of his like key to get me
Mm,
alone,
okay.
tell me that I had, you know, something exciting. Or the other thing that he used was like movie nights and game nights, to get me over to, you know, under disguise of, you know, hanging out with the kids and the whole family together. But he would wait until everybody was, you know, either off in the house, or, you know, he was very opportunistic, and he did come at it as, you know, you're attractive, like I've never been with anybody like you before, kind of thing, you know, kind
Mhm.
of giving me this sad sap husband that doesn't get laid, you know.
Right, right.
And, you know, he really played at my vulnerability as far as being young and never having somebody offer me that type of attention, as well as, you know, telling me I'm beautiful and I'm pretty, and, you know, bringing up things that, you know, knew that would flatter me. But he also used a lot of bait, like the cars and movie nights and things
Yes,
like that, to get
yes.
me under his wing.
Right. Okay, and so
Yeah.
you can carry on. I'm sorry for stopping you, but you know, how
Oh,
long did this go on for? And yeah, I mean, it is fascinating for, I think, all of us. And then when you say that, the grooming does sound the same. You know what I mean? When you break it down, because we're all given rewards, right? People think
right.
abusers lead with like they're these mean, horrible people. They're charismatic, they're good looking, they're, you know what I mean? They make us feel good. They lead with warmth and love, and we want to be around them. I mean, they're not these pedophiles with trench coats hiding in the corner that people perceive pedophiles to be. And he was indeed a pedophile and he was a predator. But they don't come at us like that, right? They disarm us in all of these remarkable ways, much like you would, you know, when you're dating somebody, right? I mean, it's kind of similar, and it makes you feel that way, whether it's your father or not, whether it's a, you know, not related. It's remarkable how their tools are similar. So this went on for then how many years in your life?
It was from when I was 14 years old was the first time, and then I think I cut it off. The physical part of it was about 17. I cut it off. But, you know, messages and emails and things going back and forth
Mhm.
was about 18. Um, and you know, it was almost like he wanted it, and he would tell me he wanted it, but I was so far, you know, removed from the situation. I didn't want to have anything to do with it.
So,
Um,
oh, go ahead. Nope, go
he,
ahead.
you know, I want to touch on the charismatic and the good looking part of things,
Hmm.
because he was both, and everybody in his life sees him as that. He's
Hmm.
very, very, very good looking. Um, and I think that actually kind of affected me as an adult, because anybody that sort of looks like him or anything like that is, it's not necessarily a trigger, but I think for someone else in my situation it would be.
Hmm.
It kind of just gives me a little bit of a flashback, and I'm like, oh
Hmm.
wow, you know, that's tough to look at sometimes. And the charismatic thing, it's, you know, people, it's not what you think it is. these people are your best friend. They want to be,
Mhm.
around you 100% of the time. They want to boost you up and make you feel like the best person that you could be, and like you said, they're not the creepy person in the alley with the trench
Right.
coat. They
Right.
aren't. And especially with kids, you have to coddle kids and give them what they want for them to trust you in situations like that. And I
Right.
think that's the scariest part is you can't see it coming. They're the
Right, you
nicest.
can't. Right. And they really break down boundaries quickly. In the last interview I did, her father would let her drink, way before she could, and those kinds of things. And they build this secret little world where it's just you and them against the world, and it feels good, which the love card comes to play. And people don't understand that relationship they build with us in the love card. I get a lot of feedback from people who don't understand, like they think that I should be mad and hate my father, and they can't sympathize with me because in the end I wanted to hug him. I needed to let that go. So can you talk a little bit about is that something that resonates with you? Did you feel like this was kind of a love affair? This or did you not? And if it did feel like a love affair, when did that love affair end for you?
Um, I think for me, and this is also looking back through, I was diagnosed with trauma-induced amnesia not long after I came out with this situation and actually sought therapy. I have very, very, very little memory of detailed situations.
Mhm.
Don't remember the love word being tossed around at all. I do remember him very much wanting to continue this for long term.
Mhm.
Um, in fact, I still have an email talking about how long does he's asking me, how long do you think we could carry this on, or how long do you want to carry this on? And I think he basically made this bubble that was just us, and it wasn't
Mhm.
love, and it was more lust, I think, and a little bit more physical than anything else. um and back, I'm 14 years old, 15 years old, 16 years old. I don't know what I'm doing. I
Mhm.
don't know what these feelings are, and I think I still struggle kind of identifying what those feelings were back then.
Mhm. That makes complete sense, actually. And I don't know that they use love. I think sometimes they can, but it's definitely this bond, this secret cocoon that they build that is enticing, right? Because there's so many ways they make it enticing, like you said. Um, yeah, that it's just true. So, you talked about the trauma amnesia a little bit. What other things did you feel like this abuse, if it had not been in your life, these things would not have been with you? So with that trauma induced amnesia, which is a horrible thing because unfortunately with it goes all good memory too. Is that correct?
Yeah. I, I think one of the biggest things that hit me really hard as I was going through this process of kind of healing and facing my fears with the whole situation was, actually, there was a very specific moment. I was flipping through some old high school pictures on Facebook, and there was pictures of me hanging out with friends, and I was at a school dance in a dress. I don't remember wearing the dress. I don't remember my hair being done up like that. I don't remember being in that building with those people. And that was a good memory that I lost. I have
Right.
pictures
Right.
there because there's proof, but if I didn't have a photo, it's just not there. And um, that's a very specific memory, that dance, at least because there's photos, um,
Mhm.
that I've worked through with my therapist, trying to kind of release some sort of memories in it. And I still have a hard time. I mean, I we never really got very far with that. But we also got we made a lot of strides in the bad memories, which is helping me heal.
Absolutely. You know, that is such a beautiful piece to bring up, Kaylee. Part of stepping back into it is going back through the pain, and the only way through is through. And we all wish there was this other way, right? I think that a lot of times an impediment for healing for people is that I don't want to go back and step into the pain. And with that comes a severe amount of loss and grief and suffering, but it is the only way through, and you do get part of your memory back. And I think as you go, that just having done a lot of that work myself, other memories do return to you in good time, but it takes some time. Actually, it's almost like a brain injury in a way. It takes time for your brain to recover because your brain was taught to keep that area hidden, right? And so really, when you begin to talk about things you've never talked about, there is a congruence in your brain that comes back to life, and it takes time. So I mean, I would just encourage you that that will get better, but it is a lot of work. And you have done the work, and you'll continue to do the work. um, One of the things that we talk about a lot when we talk about abuse with survivors is the rejection piece that was left in your life. And rejection looks different for all people, but abusers really only want you when they're abusing. And when they're not abusing you, there's a lot of rejection that's left, even after a person can be prosecuted and that sort of thing. Did you have any sense of this rejection piece that was all around the abuse and your predator? Does that, you know, can you talk about that at all?
Um, so I actually put a little, quite a bit of thought into that one because it stumped me a little bit. And I had to put myself in other people's shoes to understand that that's actually a possibility. I don't feel like I felt rejection because I was the one that cut it off. I think, I think, and I don't mean that in a way. I'm trying to
There
say it.
is there is no right or wrong answer with
Yeah,
this. Absolutely not.
I don't. I don't feel the rejection side of it. Um, because I pushed him away, I
Mhm.
feel like it may have been more on his side. I remember finally kind of realizing that he's kind of sick and
Mhm.
not accepting that he's sick, but realizing it, because I didn't accept that it was wrong until years and years later, about 13 years later. Um, but I just didn't want him anymore, kind of thing. And I didn't want to be involved. And I had actually what split the situation was I got a boyfriend that was my age. And I said, absolutely not, no more. I can't do that. And that's relatively in a nutshell, that's how it ended. Um, like I said, the emails, the texts, the pictures, the chatting
Right, right.
on for a few years or a couple of years afterwards. Um, and that's something that I still wonder why I was feeding into it. But that that's a whole nother thing.
Right. Yeah. And you know what, though? That's that grooming. You know, that is the piece that we really believe. I think that we think they care about us. And
Right.
that's the piece that you don't want to go. And so the reason I bring up rejection is what they've really done has nothing to do with love. It has to do about fully and wholeheartedly breaking another human being. But oddly, they leave this connection of relationship with us. And so the reason I like to identify that is there really should be no part of the connection that we want. But when the grooming is done right, and they're such master manipulators, they really are. They're phenomenal. It takes it takes this kind of discussion with all of us to really say to each other, wasn't that hard to break? That's almost the hardest piece to break. That's what I think, Kaylee. And whether it's your father, whether it's a neighbor, whether it's they build this bond and they make us believe that they care for us. And that's what I'm hearing from you. Is that true?
Yes, and he made me believe that I was his best friend, and
Mm,
as as this amazing piece of his life that, made him feel better, that made him feel like a man, made him feel, valued. And I really feel like I was that piece of his marriage that wasn't there. And he was
Right.
trying it with me. And he would tell me those things. I mean, he told me deepest, darkest, nasty secrets that
Wow.
I don't even know if his wife knows, type of
And here
thing.
you are 14, 15, 16, learning these things that he hasn't even told his wife. How did that feel for you when you had that deep connection and then you had to move into prosecuting him and putting him behind bars? Talk about that a little bit, because I think there's tragedy in that for the victim. People don't understand that either, but there's conflict around that, isn't there?
The level of grooming was so immense that if you think about it, if you take the inappropriate part of that whole situation out, I lost a friend.
I
And
understand.
that's the nasty, disgusting,
Mhm.
stomach turning part of it
Right.
is we got along so well. We had a lot in common. We had things to talk about. And he just made me feel like I had a best friend, you know? And the trade off for that was that he was treating me inappropriately and he was getting sex. And it's one of those things where, now if I think back to the good times, it's like, yeah, it's too bad he screwed it up, you know? Um, but then I catch myself and I think
Right.
it was all fake and it wasn't real.
Kaylee,
It was
right. I have goosebumps because I'm telling you, I just did another interview and she felt exactly the same way. And it's one of those pieces that it's so hard to break. And it's not overly complicated, but it is when you look at the facts of how you should feel, but then you're not feeling that way.
right.
It's complicated. So then when you want to go convict, I wonder if it does block some convictions from happening because people don't want to come forward for that. People always talk about, I was protecting my parents, I was protecting this, but a lot of times we're protecting the abuser. Do you think that that's true?
So I had two reasons, clear cut reasons for not going forward. One was because I didn't want to ruin his kids' lives. He had young
Wow.
kids, and it was something that I wasn't willing to do. The second reason was because my father knew him. Obviously, he was our neighbor. And my dad, I knew it was either he was going to kill him or, I was afraid of my dad being sent to prison for whatever he was going to do to this man.
Right.
And so with those two
Right.
reasons back of my head, it was a no-go for forever. I mean, until let's see, it was 2014 when I told my first person.
And how old would you have been at that time?
2014. Let's see, that was 9 years ago. So
Okay.
I was 22-ish.
Okay.
Um, and that it was a boyfriend, and we were having some problems in our relationship, and I knew what was causing them, and it was him. It was my experiences with my abuser. And um, so I sat him down and I said, look, this is what's going on. This is how I feel. This is what happened to me. And this is why I'm reacting this way. And he forgot the issues completely. He looked at me and he said, you have to do something. And at that time, I was too scared. His kids were still young. I didn't want my dad to go to prison.
Right.
So we came to an agreement that I would send him an email and let him know how I felt. Um, so at this point, this is 12 years later, I want to say.
After
And
after the abuse stopped.
after the abuse
Okay.
stopped. And, I wrote out a letter and I said, I don't know how you sleep at night. I don't know why you thought that was okay. And it was colorful. And I let all my feelings out in it, or at least a good portion. And he came back with, I'll hit you up after work. And that was it. And I
Still,
said, and he wanted to call me on the phone. And I said, no. I said, I'm not going to talk to you on the phone. I would rather do it over email. And then he never replied. So I think that was 2014 or 15. Again, my memory, my timeline.
right. It's so right. I understand. It's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
And did you have a fear of talking to him on the phone because of the bond that was still there? Was it
Oh,
easier to keep those boundaries with email or?
I wanted physical evidence. I was at that
Gotcha.
in writing, and I wanted him to admit it on paper, essentially. Um,
You said something a little bit earlier that you didn't really know that it was wrong until you did. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Did you stopped it because you got in a relationship with a boy that was your age? Because I do think it's complicated if you haven't had the discussion with someone or someone's not coming to you and saying, is there inappropriate behavior in your life? We're not trained to have these discussions. And so we're only as good as our information, right? So when did you, it just struck me when you said, I didn't know it was wrong. You know what I'm saying? This is not for judgment purposes, but for understanding purposes. When did you come to that understanding that this was drastically wrong?
I knew it was criminal and wrong so even when I told my boyfriend at the time for the first time, I told someone, um, even when I told him, it still wasn't wrong in my mind. It was something that happened. It was kind of
Mm,
messed up, really didn't want anybody to know. But in my mind, it wasn't, it was at this level. It wasn't at this
mhm.
level, horrible things that somebody could do to someone. I didn't realize that until I'm trying to think, 2018, I want to say, 2019,
Wow.
somewhere in there. So quite recently. Um, and I was dating somebody else. And again, I told him, I opened up. He was the second person I had ever opened up to. And he looked at me and he said, you have to do something. And at that moment, the way he looked at me and the way that the, just the emphasis he put behind saying, you have to go to the police. You have to do something.
Right.
Again, I said, I'm not ready. But I booked an appointment with a therapist. And when I booked one appointment, I went to one appointment. And after that, I knew. I canceled my second appointment. And that's when I was at, it was my boyfriend's beach house with my dad and my stepmom and my boyfriend. We were sitting around the fire. And I looked at him and I just said, it's time. And my stepmom and him got up, went in the house, and I sat there and I told my dad everything. And not details, but I told him everything. And it was right before then that I realized it was criminal, that I realized it was here and
You
not
know, right. And so when we go back to the story where it starts with the pedophile. And guess what the pedophile wants us to believe? It's not that bad. We are best friends. We are secret lovers. And so it's so sad, but it's this encryption why I really wanted to start this channel, why I really wanted to start talking about it, because to decode that, it's not as easy as people think it is, right? Like you're not going to watch a news story and say, oh, that's us. You are outside of every abuse story you've heard because you guys are deep friends. You guys have this secret connection and it's really not that bad. Minimize, 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 right? And so it's so beautiful actually that you have presented it in this way because there's just so much truth and validation in that. People are out there not recognizing the severe abuse. You were 14 years old. You know, it's severe abuse, and yet these pedophiles get you to believe their story. It's quite remarkable. So moving into, I always like to talk about, in the time that we have together, what trauma symptoms do you feel like were left in your body, whether you know that it's criminal or not? Don't you think our body houses and tells us those things through symptoms and just the way that we play life out? What can you talk to me about what was left with you in the aftermath of it all?
Yeah. The biggest thing, like I've kind of touched on, is the amnesia. And that was triggered and created by disassociation.
Yes.
And I think that's the biggest thing that trauma victims use. It doesn't matter what kind of trauma it is, your body and your brain.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Um, I don't think I stopped disassociating until recently,
Isn't that
honestly.
crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I you can disassociate in the heat of the moment, in
Mhm.
when the trauma is actually happening and the abuse is actually happening. But you can also disassociate when you're having a moment when you see somebody that maybe looks like your abuser.
Mhm.
Right. Um, you know,
That trigger comes in and you're off,
your
right?
shuts
Yep.
down to protect yourself, um,
Yes.
to protect your psyche, because it's there to protect you. Unfortunately, in some cases, um,
Right.
it's a survival mechanism. You can't.
Absolutely it is.
Um, Other than that, you know, for a lot of years, and I, this is something that we dug up from my memory because I didn't have it originally,
Mhm.
but I remember in high school and some of my earlier relationships, because I don't know if I said, but he did take my virginity. So he was my first experience. So as I kind of moved on into growing into a young adult, and having sexual relationships with other people, I didn't want to be touched in any way that he touched me. So I had this physical reaction to
Wow.
physical.
Wow. Mhm.
It was really hard to understand because I just kind of tensed up and shied away from them for no reason. In my head, it was no reason. And it ruined
Mhm.
relationships.
Right.
And I ended up getting called a prude. And, in high school and college. And, because I didn't want to sleep with people or be touched or it wasn't super severe with the touch, but in certain situations, if somebody put their hand on the back of my neck, he used to do that. And like standing next to me, he would put his hand on the back of my neck and like rub my neck. Anybody did that, and I would just kind of melt. Um, and
And
so
you know what, that is an absolute trigger. People in today's society use the word trigger so frivolously that it upsets me, because what you just explained, that's a trigger. That means that's just the
it,
essence of a trigger. And so you're reacting to it. Is the body keeps the score, Miss Kalli, and that's exactly what it is. Your body, which I think is a tremendous blessing when you look at it for what it's doing for us. What it's saying to us is, don't stay stuck. There's something here. I need you to come back to me. I need you to come back to me. And it's remarkable to me that triggers have gotten a really bad rap, but what they're really there for to do, like you said, is protect us and also to bring us back when we have time. Like they continually say to us, something's not right here, right? Even if you didn't have the memory, you knew in that moment there was something that wasn't right.
right, and over and over and over again, my body.
Yes. Right.
Right.
Undeniably so.
Yes.
Right. Right. Undeniably so. So the other thing that I like to ask, and it may seem like this is a question that isn't as profound as others, but honestly, it really is, because one of the things that I really tire of is that when people hear stories of tragedy in childhood, they think that we can't possibly be even of the quality close to them. And the truth is, I think that I can run circles around a whole lot of people in life. And so I like to ask people who have come through severe childhood crimes, which that certainly falls into that category. How did this make you weak? And how did it make you strong? Or did it just make you weak or strong? Or did it leave both in you?
I think that's a wonderful question. And this question is why I'm here, because I believe that it made me weak in the very, very early years of after this had happened. Like I said, I had those physical reactions. I sort of became a little bit afraid of men, especially ones that reminded me of him. But I have come out of this a much stronger person. And I will say this over and over and over again. I feel lucky to have come out of this the way I have. Um, I am blessed to have the ability to digest what has happened to me, and the ability to see therapists and go through the conviction and the case for years and stick with it. I feel blessed that my body and my mind and my soul were able to do that. I know that there's women out there that don't have the courage, don't have the motivation, and maybe just absolutely can't even fathom coming out and saying something. And I feel blessed that I did, and that I'm on the other side. Um, and so my answer to that, as I sit here right now, is it made me the strongest person it could have made me. I I want to do more things like this. Um, in the last community that I lived in, I was really, really trying to start a support group for women, and it didn't really take off. So I'm still trying it here in my new community. Um, it's it's something I want to spread, because I feel blessed to have been able to get this far and to have this
Right.
out.
Right. Well, you know what? You're an overcomer now. And once you've overcome something, you can stand on top of the mountain and look down and say, that was a hell of a climb. But right, when you get to the other side, then it is important to carry that message that you can. I have a lot of social media and I do a lot of advocacy work. And in that work, I see so many people that struggle daily that say, I just don't think I'm going to make it through today. And so bringing these stories like yours, one of victory and one of overcoming, and it felt once insurmountable for you, because we talked about that in the early times. And I think we have to remember that this isn't just like an overnight success thing. It's daily conviction, like you said. It's daily work. It's taking the courage, telling your family, having your family come along and support you so that you're not alone in it anymore. And so I think it's just absolutely beautiful that you have overcome and you did achieve, and that you did put the son of a bitch behind bars, because I wish more of them would go there. And I'd like more stories like this to reach out there and tell people, you know what, you can do this. And actually, I got a conviction, because that's really important, because so many don't even make it to that point. And I also want to ask you though now, because you were 14 years old, and is there anything that comes to your mind just making this transition? And I'm sorry if I did that quickly, but in the time that we have, I think it's so important for us to educate society at large, the world at large, because this is an epidemic problem around the world. It's everywhere. India has a tremendous problem with it. America, it's everywhere. What can we do? What would have helped you? Is there anything that you can think of, one thing that would have helped you disclose earlier, maybe at 15? It's so funny how children take the burden on not to burden anybody around them. I hear it all the time. I'm not going to do this to my mom. I'm not going to do this to my dad. You wouldn't even do it to the perpetrator's children. I mean, think about that. That's such a heavy thing. What can we do to give the voice that says, you need to tell? This is not your burden. the perpetrator was lying to you, because those are lies that came in that kept you quiet. But I'm just going to turn that over to you and take your time. They're really tough questions, but there's got to be something we can do.
It's a tough question, and it's a tough subject. Um, I think, and I because of my situation and the things, how my story kind of played out, there was somebody that was extremely close to the situation that I'm almost 100% sure knew everything that was going on, but said nothing, and that is his wife. So I think the best way to, at least in my situation, and I know that it's not everybody, and I know everybody's is very different, but those people that are closest to the pedophile or the rapist or whatever, because the victim, it's not, the victim is, I feel like I, as a child, I never would have said anything because I was afraid, and I was also very groomed. So I think that's really, really hard to answer. But I think if we put a little bit more information out there about some of the signs and to look for them, and we need to pull this genre of people out of the, you can't say anything about them, you can't confront them, and it's going to ruin your life, it's going to do this, it's going to do that.
Right.
Know that your husband and your father of 3 is abusing the next door neighbor girl, or even if there's just some inappropriate anything, we know she knew.
Right. So many times it is. Yeah, I think that's a remarkable thing. Keep going, and we'll talk about it. Keep going. Yeah, I mean, I think there is such a responsibility for the people who are around these pedophiles. Even if they've come through abuse, there's always this check in your spirit, and they're seeing this, right? Like they're around the house all the time. She was home, she didn't work, she was in the home. And I think this really is an important thing that says you are complicit in this crime if you don't say anything. And it would be wonderful if we held them accountable, because it's very hard not to see. These perps aren't that good, Kalli, where it's just completely invisible to everybody. I love that. That's such a fantastic point. And for society to hold them to that, just that place of accountability, right?
Accountability. And it, especially when it, like in my situation and a lot of other women's situation, these acts of abuse are happening in the home and
absolutely
under the family's nose. And I would never expect, which I want to bring up this, I actually made contact with the middle son that I was closest to back then. He was closest to my age and was, well, I guess the older one was a little bit closer, but we bonded. And I recently got in contact with him and was able to kind of hash out what happened after his dad's conviction and everything. And he had stories of when he remembered inappropriate things happening. And I would absolutely never expect the child to say anything. I don't blame him for not saying him, not one bit, because he's also a child and he's also a victim in the situation. He was pulled under by his dad in the whole thing. And his dad actually tried to drown him with the whole case and, telling him that I was a liar and that, I was making all of this up and that his memories were not true. This is a situation where the adult needs to step in, and in this case it was his wife, unfortunately.
Well, I'm so proud of you to hear that you actually reached out to the family. And this is something that I also think is important. When you bring that up, everybody goes silent, like, oh, we can't talk about this to anybody. Really? I say horseshit to that whole thing. Light it up, put it in the newspapers. You know what? You want a different story told, live a different life. I'm so proud of you for getting hold of his family, because number one, most pedophiles are not just abusers to one person. It can happen, but it's not usually the case. So we've got to keep other people safe around it as well, right? He doesn't have the right now. He lost that right when he abused a child. And so I just have to say that really fires me up because I'm really proud of you. I'm told often that I need to be quiet and quit reaching out and quit talking to people. And you know what? You want a different story told, live a different life. So I'm really proud of you for doing that. That takes a lot of courage.
Thank you. Yeah.
I
It
like
was
it
an important part of my healing as well. And
hugely.
it turned out he needed it too. He's in therapy for the whole situation and he's working through his own memories and things like that because it really did traumatize him.
Oh, I'm sure. And the other thing that is true when you're a pedophile, you are not okay. Victims are usually okay. We're resilient. We use tools to keep us safe while all of the abuse is happening. But a pedophile, you can be sure, has some serious mental or evil problems going on. I don't know what's going on. I tend to think there's some evil mixed in there. But you know what? They certainly have that. And the reason I say that is, of course, his family is probably traumatized. But at the same time, the
Yeah.
wife still did have complicity in the act, as far as I'm concerned, because she did not do anything when she had checks in her spirit. If her son was seeing things, it's very hard to believe that she wasn't seeing anything at all. So good
Right.
job on that. Fantastic. The other thing I like to ask in this, because God gets such a bad rap and all these things, and I hear it just because I'm out here all the time talking to people. And there is no right answer or wrong answer. I'm always just curious about, where was God during the abuse and after the abuse for you? What did that look like? It's different for each one of us, but I always like to ask that because it always seems like there's some kind of faith God wound somewhere mixed in.
I think, as especially in high school, I think I never really grew up really religious or believing in God very strongly or anything like that. So it was kind of non-existent in my life up until about 5 or 6 years ago. I met some really, really great friends and they took me to church and I fell in love with this church. Um, and I don't currently go to church at the moment, but I am always kind of reaching into myself to understand where my faith is. And, I still question. I do. I'm still in my journey
Yeah.
finding God and if he belongs in my life or not. But I feel this really strong pull to feel like the comfort of faith
Mhm.
and the comfort of having God in my life. Um, Mostly because I do feel like I had some help in this situation.
That's,
It,
yeah, that's awesome. And that's remarkable. And this is not any kind of religious show or anything like that. But the reason I include that is because there's so many times, like in my situation, my father taught Bible study and then was raping me in the back. And so religion gets such a weird twist in many things. So I don't like to make it a huge religious thing, but if people do have a God hurt or anything, I like to talk about it. I want to spend this last little bit just to give you kind of a free moment, Kalli, to share anything that we may have forgotten, anything that you feel like is a really important message. I'd really love to have you back just to talk about some of these things, because each one of us has, incest is such a different thing than an outside abuser. I know that you had a strong family in your life and that sort of thing, but it's still incredibly important because you are still a child and there's millions and millions who have gone through what you've gone through. So I'd like to revisit this with you again at some other point, but I do want to give you time just to explore anything that we may have forgotten to talk that's important to you that you'd like to leave on this. So I'm going to just turn that back over to you for a minute.
okay. I think the biggest thing that I would like to um, bring up was the process of prosecution and what
Mm.
um, from not necessarily all the details. Maybe this is something for another day, but kind of the process of what I went through. I want to make it not sound so scary for the girls that are
Oh,
maybe,
please take the time. I think that's beautiful. Take the time.
yeah.
Go.
I mentioned that I told my dad, and that was the biggest step for me to open up and actually make something happen.
Mhm.
So that night, my dad and I made a deal that the only way this was going to be handled was through the police, and handled the correct way. So the very next day, my dad had a couple of connections in the police department. I think it was actually the sheriff's department. And so he made a contact just to get a name of a deputy that we could make a statement to. We went down to the police station. I made my statement. Everybody was warm and kind and welcoming and made the entire situation easy to go through.
Oh, it's wonderful.
And they made me feel heard. And I think the biggest thing was nobody in the, and I know not everybody gets this, but nobody doubted me. I never got the, either you're crazy or you're a whore. I
The
never got
nuts or
that.
sluts.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
a nut. Yep, you're nuts or sluts.
Yeah.
I love this. This is so wonderful to share. Keep going because I think it is a very important message. I love that you're doing this. Keep going.
Yeah. So after I gave my statement, the deputy and I sat down and we made a plan. Um, our plan was to interrogate essentially my abuser through me, which I agreed to. Trying to pull any information or maybe a confession out over the phone, through text or email. We did several recorded phone calls. One of them drummed up not enough quite for solid or solid what am I trying to say? Like a confession.
Mhm.
But we also did a recorded line phone call with my dad. Um, and it was very, very telling. And it was played during grand jury. And I really think that was a moment that was irreplaceable in the eyes of the law. Um, it it came about as close to a confession as you could get without having one. But the steps that they take are, they make it easy and comfortable. And I do realize not every woman is going to get the exact same treatment. Some of them may get doubted, but you have to believe in exactly what happened to you and don't doubt yourself, because you can get to the other side. It's just, it takes a lot,
Right.
but it's
So how
possible.
how long was the whole process then from the time that you walked in to report until the time that he was convicted? How long was that?
So he was convicted and sentenced last February. Um, and I started this, I want to say it was either March of 2018 or 2019. I'm not sure. So 4 or 5 years.
And I'm sure, what did your life feel like though during that process?
It was it was a little bit of turmoil, and that's okay. The entire
Mhm.
time I tried to keep up with my therapist and just kind of work through, a little bit, if something came up. And that was actually something that brought out memories that were submitted as,
Mm.
I did a type of therapy called EMDR, and it
Mhm.
is admissible in court because it will draw memories. That was a big thing, which everybody should try it if you have some sort of trauma, especially some sort of amnesia or anything like that. Something that's kind of buried.
Mhm.
It was amazing. It's intense, but it
So,
was
so the whole process, what I just hear you saying is you healed more through the process. It wasn't, it was triggering and difficult, but it also brought healing.
absolutely.
That's
It
a
was the
wonderful thing to share.
Yeah, it was the most healing thing I could do. And even if, even the biggest thing for me was I didn't care if he ended up convicted or with jail time or anything like that. The biggest thing was that everyone knew who he was, and it
Right.
came, and it was out there in the open and in the real world that he did this to me. And whether or not we had enough evidence to convict him or not didn't matter to me, because the sheriff's department believed me, my
Right.
family, everybody
Right.
was believing me, and it was, I couldn't have asked for a better team.
That's awesome.
My lawyer, the DA that prosecuted, my family, everybody that was in my corner was amazing.
It's just so awesome. And the other thing is that he has to now register as a pedophile. Is that correct?
Yes,
And
that's acceptable.
so think what you did to keep children safe around him. That's the other reason why we should be prosecuting these people and finding that courage.
Absolutely.
That is beautiful. That is just such a beautiful thing to end on. Thank you so much. We're at time now, so I'm gonna close. Thank you so much for being with us. We'll see you on the next episode of Let's Talk About It.